Gabriel Trent adjusted his visor against the blazing heat of the twin suns, their unrelenting glare casting the desert of New Ceres in hues of crimson and gold. He leaned forward in his rover's seat, squinting at the barren landscape. Endless dunes stretched out like a restless ocean of sand, their shifting patterns marked by the occasional ruins of alien machinery or relics from the old human wars. His salvager instincts had been honed over years of scavenging this wasteland, but today had been fruitless. Nothing but heat and dust. He stepped over various trash bins and extracted what he could find, with snow crusting the bottom. He sighed, slumping back in the seat. Life on New Ceres wasn't for the faint-hearted. The planet was a wasteland, its once thriving colonies reduced to scraps by wars no one remembered. Gabriel made his living picking through the detritus left behind, searching for bits of alien tech or forgotten human engineering that could fetch a price in the scattered markets. But days like this reminded him just how close he was to the edge. Food was running low, and his rover, an old clunky machine he'd cobbled together over the years, was on its last legs. As he turned the vehicle toward the outpost, preparing to call it a day, a streak of light tore across the sky. Green fire arced through the heavens, trailing smoke and embers as it plummeted to the desert below. Gabriel's hands tightened on the rover's controls as the ground shook beneath him, the shock wave sending plumes of sand spiraling into the air. His heart raced as he watched the crash site bloom with a fiery glow in the distance. Instinct kicked in. He hit the accelerator, the rover lurching forward with a sputter as it sped across the dunes. Salvagers lived for moments like this, rare chances to find something extraordinary. But as Gabriel drew closer to the site, an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. This wasn't a piece of debris from orbit, nor was it human-made. The craft was sleek and otherworldly, its jagged design almost organic. A faint green glow pulsed along its surface, veins of energy flickering erratically like a dying heartbeat. He brought the rover to a halt and grabbed his plasma rifle from the rack. His fingers hesitated over the weapon's grip. The desert was dangerous enough on its own, but alien tech often carried risks he couldn't predict. Still, curiosity overpowered caution. Slinging the rifle over his shoulder, he approached the wreckage. The air near the ship shimmered with heat and static. Pieces of its hull lay scattered across the sand, some still glowing with an unnatural light. Gabriel climbed over a jagged piece of metal and peered into the shattered cockpit. His breath caught. A girl lay inside, crumpled amidst the wreckage. Her skin shimmered with an opalescent glow, almost translucent under the harsh desert light. Silvery hair fell in waves around her face, and her large, luminous blue eyes fluttered open to meet his. She was humanoid, but undeniably alien. Her features too perfect, too ethereal to belong to Earth, or any colony Gabriel knew. "Help me," she whispered. Her voice, soft yet resonant, carried a weight that made Gabriel's chest tighten. For a moment he froze. He had heard of aliens, had even seen dead ones in the markets, their bodies sold for research or trophy. But he'd never encountered one alive. His mind raced with questions, but the girl's weak, labored breathing pushed him into action. Carefully, he climbed into the cockpit and reached for her. The heat from the wreckage singed his arms, but he ignored it, focusing on her fragile frame. She clung to him as he lifted her, her hands trembling. The trip back to the rover felt like a lifetime. Each step through the blistering heat and unstable terrain weighed heavily on Gabriel. But he didn't stop. By the time he secured her in the rover's seat, sweat poured down his face and his arms ached from carrying her. As he strapped her in, her head lolled to the side, her breathing shallow. "So, stay with me," he muttered, climbing into the driver's seat. He revved the engine, urging the vehicle to move faster than it ever had before. The girl didn't respond, her glowing eyes slipping shut. When they finally reached Gabriel's workshop, the suns were beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. He parked the rover and carried the girl inside, his boots clanging against the metal floor. The workshop was cluttered with half-finished projects and salvaged parts, hardly the place for delicate medical work, but it was all he had. He laid her on the workbench, sweeping aside tools and debris. Her breathing was faint, her skin losing its iridescent glow. Gabriel rummaged through his supplies, pulling out a universal stabilizer kit he'd picked up in a trade. The kit wasn't designed for humans, let alone aliens, but it was better than nothing. "Okay," he said under his breath, attaching a patch to her arm. "This might sting." The patch emitted a faint hiss as it activated, sending a wave of energy through her body. Her back arched slightly, and her breathing steadied, though her eyes remained closed. Gabriel exhaled in relief, wiping sweat from his brow. He didn't know what kind of injury she had sustained, but at least she was stable for now. He sank into a chair, letting the adrenaline drain from his system. Questions swirled in his mind. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why had she crashed in the middle of nowhere? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp beep from the perimeter alarms. Gabriel shot to his feet, his heart pounding. The monitors on the wall lit up, displaying a live feed of the desert outside. Black hovercraft streaked across the dunes, their sleek designs unmistakable. Dominion enforcers. Gabriel's blood ran cold. The Dominion rarely ventured into the wastelands unless they were after something, or someone. He turned to the girl. Her eyes fluttered open and she looked at him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. "They found me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They'll kill both of us." Gabriel's jaw tightened. He didn't know what she had done to warrant the Dominion's wrath, but the desperation in her voice left no room for doubt. She was in danger, and now so was he. "Stay here," he said, grabbing his rifle. "I'll handle this." He activated the workshop's defenses, a series of automated turrets and an energy shield that shimmered as it enveloped the building. The hovercrafts arrived moments later, their engines humming ominously as they formed a tight circle around the workshop. A voice crackled through the comms. "Gabriel Trent, this is Dominion Enforcer Unit Sigma 4. You are harboring a fugitive. Surrender her immediately, and we will consider leniency." Gabriel snorted, switching off the comms. Leniency from the Dominion was a lie, and he knew it. They would kill her, and likely him as well. His fingers tightened around the rifle's grip as the first shot rocked the shield. The battle began in earnest. The turrets fired in rapid bursts, targeting the Enforcer's hovercrafts with pinpoint accuracy. Gabriel took up a position near the window, firing his rifle at the soldiers who disembarked. Plasma bolts scorched the air, and the scent of burnt metal filled the workshop. Behind him, the girl stirred. Her hands glowed faintly as she murmured something in her alien tongue. A ripple of energy pulsed outward, momentarily disabling the Enforcer's equipment. Gabriel took advantage of the opening, firing a series of shots that brought down 2 of the hovercrafts. "Nice trick," he said, glancing back at her. "I can help," she replied, her voice stronger now. She crawled to his side, her glowing hands brushing against his arm. A surge of warmth spread through him, sharpening his senses and steadying his aim. He didn't have time to question how she had done it. He just knew he felt stronger, faster. Together they held the line. Gabriel shielded her from incoming fire, his body taking hits that left burns and scars, while she used her energy to disrupt the Enforcer's attacks. The battle raged on, the workshop trembling under the assault, but neither of them faltered. When the last hovercraft fell and the final soldier retreated, Gabriel collapsed to the ground, his body battered but alive. The girl knelt beside him, her hands glowing as she healed the worst of his wounds. He winced as the energy coursed through him, but the pain was fleeting. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, her fingers tracing the scars on his arms. The hollow lines around his eyes were less visible now. "Yeah, I did," Gabriel replied, his voice hoarse. "I couldn't let them take you." Her luminous eyes met his, filled with gratitude. "You've done more than save my life. I owe you everything." At that moment, Felton swooped down from the sky. Gabriel chuckled weakly, leaning back against the wall. "Let's just focus on getting out of here before they come back." As the twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of violet and amber, Gabriel and the girl climbed into his battered rover. Though his body bore new scars and his workshop was in ruins, Gabriel felt a strange sense of fulfillment. He had shielded her from death, and in doing so, he had found something far more valuable than the scraps he scavenged from the sands. The night came swiftly on New Ceres, the temperature dropping with an intensity that left the air biting against exposed skin. Gabriel gripped the controls of the rover tightly as they sped across the dunes, the twin moons casting faint light over the desolate expanse. Beside him, the girl sat silent and watchful, her hands resting in her lap, their faint glow dimming and flickering as if in rhythm with her weakening strength. Despite the stillness in the cabin, Gabriel's mind raced with questions he couldn't yet bring himself to ask. The battle had taken its toll. Gabriel's arms ached where the Dominion's plasma bolts had grazed him, leaving angry burns that stung even beneath the hastily wrapped bandages. His once pristine workshop was now a smoking ruin, every piece of tech he'd painstakingly salvaged over the years either destroyed or left behind in his haste to escape. But every time he glanced at the girl, he knew he'd made the right choice. Her life, fragile and extraordinary, carried a weight he couldn't explain. The silence stretched until Gabriel finally spoke, his voice rough against the quiet hum of the rover's engine. "You're going to have to tell me what's going on. Who are you, and why is the Dominion after you?" "My mood has changed," Gabriel said. "My mood has changed." The girl turned her head slowly, her glowing eyes meeting his. For a moment she seemed to struggle with the weight of his questions, her mouth opening and closing as if the words eluded her. Finally she exhaled softly, her shoulders slumping. "My name is Calith," she said, her voice melodic yet tinged with weariness. "I am, or was, a keeper." "A keeper?" Gabriel repeated, his brow furrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It's difficult to explain," she replied, her hands curling into fists in her lap. "On my world, the keepers are protectors, guardians of knowledge, and life. We are bonded to something ancient, something that exists beyond what most can understand. It allows us to heal, to sustain, but it also binds us to our purpose." Gabriel shot her a sidelong glance. Her words carried a gravity he didn't fully comprehend, but he could hear the pain behind them. "And what purpose is that?" "Protecting the poor. To preserve the sacred balance of the universe," she said simply, though her voice faltered. "The Dominion doesn't see it that way. To them I am a threat, a weapon they can't control. They hunt me because they believe my existence is dangerous." Gabriel grunted, his grip on the controls tightening. "Sounds like the Dominion, all right. Anything they can't use or bend to their will, they destroy." Calith nodded, her expression distant. "They've already destroyed so much. My people, my home." Her voice broke, and she closed her eyes, a single tear glinting in the moonlight. "I thought I could escape, but their reach is vast." Gabriel's chest tightened at the raw emotion in her voice. He wasn't one for grand causes or fights he couldn't win. His life had been about survival, about scraping by in a galaxy that cared little for people like him. But now, Sitting beside Calith, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. A need to protect, to fight for something greater than himself. "They're not going to stop," he said after a long pause. "If they tracked you this far, they'll keep coming. We need a plan." Calith nodded slowly, her hands unclenching as she took a deep breath. "There's a place," she said, her voice steadier now. "A sanctuary hidden deep within the Ceresian wastes. It was built by an ancient race long before the Dominion came to power. If we can reach it, they won't be able to find us." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a fairy tale. How do you know it's real?" "It's real," Calith said firmly. "The Keepers have records of it, passed down through generations. It's more than a hiding place. It's a stronghold of knowledge, a repository of power the Dominion fears. If we can reach it, I might be able to access its resources and find a way to stop them." The skepticism lingered in Gabriel's mind, but he pushed it aside. Whether the sanctuary existed or not, staying put wasn't an option. The Dominion would have every tracker and enforcer in the sector hunting them by sunrise. "All right," he said, his tone resolute. "Tell me where it is, and we'll head there." Calith hesitated, her glowing eyes scanning the horizon as if she could see beyond it. "It's not that simple," she admitted. "The path to the sanctuary is hidden, protected by layers of defenses meant to deter anyone who isn't worthy. We'll need to pass through trials, tests of will and strength." Gabriel groaned, rubbing his forehead. "Trials? You got to be kidding me. Do these ancient types ever just leave a damn map?" Calith managed a faint smile, the first he'd seen from her. "If it were easy, the Dominion would have claimed it long ago." He sighed, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the desert stretched endlessly before them. "Fine. Trials, ancient sanctuaries, whatever it takes. Just don't expect me to like it." Calith's smile faded as she studied him. "You've already done so much. I don't know why you chose to help me, but I won't forget it." Gabriel shook his head, his voice gruff. "Let's get one thing straight. I didn't do it for gratitude. You were dying, and I wasn't about to leave you to those bastards. That's all there is to it." Her expression softened, and she nodded. "Even so, thank you." They traveled in silence for a while, the rover's engine humming as it navigated the treacherous terrain. Gabriel kept an eye on the scanner, watching for signs of pursuit. The Dominion wouldn't give up easily, and he didn't plan on being caught off guard again. The first signs of trouble came just before dawn. The scanner beeped erratically, its display lighting up with scattered blips, moving fast and closing in from the west. Gabriel cursed under his breath, slamming his foot on the accelerator, blowing the cobwebs away. "They've found us," he said grimly. "Hold on." Calith gripped the edge of her seat as the rover surged forward, its engines straining. The dunes rose and fell like waves, each bump jarring them as Gabriel pushed the vehicle to its limits. In the distance, faint lights appeared, their sharp, purposeful movements unmistakable. "Hovercrafts," Calith said, her voice tense. "They'll catch us easily if we stay on open ground." Gabriel's mind raced. The terrain offered few options, flat desert as far as the eye could see, with occasional outcroppings of jagged rocks. He spotted a narrow canyon ahead, its walls rising like jagged teeth from the sand. "Hang on," he growled, steering the rover toward the canyon. The vehicle jolted as it entered the narrow pass, the walls closing in around them. Gabriel weaved between the rocks, the hovercraft's engines roaring closer behind them. Plasma bolts zipped past, striking the canyon walls and sending shards of stone raining down. Calith raised her hands, her eyes glowing brighter as she began to chant in her alien tongue. A shimmering barrier formed behind the rover, blocking the canyon entrance. The hovercrafts smashed into it, their engines sputtering as the energy short-circuited their systems. Gabriel glanced over his shoulder, his lips quirking into a smirk. Not bad. Kalith sagged in her seat, the glow fading from her hands. I can't keep doing that, she said weakly. It takes too much out of me. Then let's make sure you don't have to, Gabriel replied, his focus returning to the path ahead. The canyon stretched on, its winding passages leading them deeper into the heart of the desert. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Gabriel couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was only just beginning. The sanctuary was still far away, and the Dominion would stop at nothing to capture them. But for the first time in years, Gabriel felt something other than survival driving him forward. He had promised to protect Kalith, and no matter what lay ahead, he intended to keep that promise. The first light of dawn bathed the desert in a pale glow, softening the harsh edges of the dunes and casting long shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the sands. Gabriel slowed the rover, its engine rumbling softly as he scanned the horizon. His eyes darted to the scanner, still flickering with faint, sporadic signals, but the immediate threat appeared to have subsided. The barrier Kalith had conjured had bought them time, but he knew it wouldn't last forever. Beside him, Kalith stirred. Her pale skin shimmered faintly in the growing light, though the soft glow that had once radiated from her hands and eyes was now a faint flicker. Gabriel could see the exhaustion etched into her delicate features. She had used more of her energy than she had to spare during their escape. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough but tinged with genuine concern. She nodded weakly, though the slight tremble in her hands betrayed her weariness. "I'll be fine," she said, though the words felt more like a reassurance for him than a reflection of her reality. "The sanctuary isn't far now. We need to keep moving." Gabriel frowned, his instincts warring with the urgency of her words. The hovercrafts might be temporarily disabled, but the Dominion wouldn't take long to regroup and track them again. Still, Kalith looked like she might collapse at any moment, and driving her into the ground wasn't going to help either of them. "We'll rest for a bit," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "A couple of hours, just enough for you to get your strength back." Kalith hesitated, glancing at the horizon, as if she could see the dangers closing in on them. After a moment, she relented, her shoulders sagging. "All right," she murmured. "But no longer." Gabriel pulled the rover into the shadow of a rocky outcrop, its jagged spires rising like broken spears from the sand. It offered a semblance of cover, though he doubted it would fool Dominion scanners for long. He stepped out of the vehicle, the cool morning air a welcome relief after the relentless heat of the night. Stretching his sore muscles, he grabbed a canteen and a protein bar from the supplies stashed in the back of the rover, handing them to Kalith. "Eat," he said simply. "You need it more than I do." Kalith accepted the offering, her luminous eyes watching him intently as she unwrapped the bar. You're kind," she said after a moment, her voice soft. Gabriel snorted, leaning against the side of the rover. "I wouldn't go that far. I just know what it's like to need help and not get it. Only nootropics," he said, finally finishing off the sentence. She tilted her head, studying him with an expression that made him feel strangely exposed. "You've lost people," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Haven't we all?" he muttered, taking a long swig from his own canteen. Kalith didn't press the matter, instead turning her attention to the food in her hands. They sat in silence for a time, the only sounds the faint whisper of the wind and the occasional creak of the rover as it settled into the sand. Gabriel kept his eyes on the horizon, scanning for any sign of movement. The quiet felt fragile, as if it could chatter at any moment. After what felt like an eternity, Kalith broke the silence. "The sanctuary. It's more than just a hiding place," she said, her voice thoughtful. "It holds something ancient, something powerful. If the Dominion gains control of it—" "They won't," Gabriel interrupted, his tone firm. "We'll get there first." They were silent for some time. Clearly, neither one of them liked. She glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You're confident." "Just stubborn," he replied, though his gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Now get some rest. We'll need to move soon." Kalith nodded, her exhaustion finally overcoming her resistance. She leaned back in her seat, her eyes slipping shut. Gabriel watched her for a moment, then turned his attention to the rifle propped against the rover's frame. He checked its charge, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. The weapon was old but reliable, a reflection of his own approach to survival. As the hours crept by, Gabriel's thoughts drifted. He thought of the battles he'd fought, the people he'd lost, and the life he'd carved out for himself in the harsh wastelands of New Series. He'd always told himself that he didn't need anyone, that relying on others was a weakness. But Kalith's presence had stirred something in him, a long-buried desire to protect, to fight for more than just survival. The sun was climbing higher in the sky when Kalith stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She sat up slowly, the faint glow in her skin a little brighter now. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger. Gabriel nodded, climbing into the rover and starting the engine. They set off once more, the vehicle rumbling across the dunes. As they traveled deeper into the desert, the terrain began to change. The sand gave way to rocky plateaus and narrow canyons, the landscape growing more treacherous with each passing mile. Kalith guided him, her directions precise but often cryptic. "Turn left at the pillar with 3 shadows," she'd say, or "follow the path that feels cold even in the sun." Gabriel didn't question her, trusting that her connection to the sanctuary would lead them true. Hours later they reached a narrow gorge, its entrance marked by 2 towering obelisks of black stone. Strange symbols were etched into their surfaces, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Kalith's expression grew tense as they approached. "This is the threshold," she said, her voice low. "The sanctuary lies beyond, but so do the trials." Gabriel parked the rover and climbed out, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He studied the obelisks warily. "What kind of trials are we talking about?" "Tests of will, strength, and truth," Kalith said, her gaze fixed on the glowing symbols. "They are meant to ensure that only those who are worthy can enter." "Oh," said Cicerin. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "And if we're not worthy?" Kalith hesitated. "Then we won't leave this place." Gabriel let out a low whistle. "No pressure, huh?" She managed a faint smile, though her eyes were solemn. "I wouldn't have brought you here if I didn't believe we could succeed." He nodded, his grip tightening on the rifle. "Let's get it over with." They stepped forward together, the air growing heavy as they passed between the obelisks. The landscape shifted around them, the rocky gorge dissolving into a swirling expanse of light and shadow. Gabriel's stomach churned, and he staggered, the ground beneath him feeling insubstantial. When the disorientation passed, they found themselves standing in a vast chamber, its walls and ceiling lost in darkness. A single path stretched before them, illuminated by floating orbs of light. At the far end of the path, a massive door stood, its surface engraved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when Gabriel looked at them. Kalith stepped forward, her posture rigid. "The first trial will reveal itself soon," she said, her voice steady. Gabriel followed, his senses on high alert. The air grew colder with each step, and an oppressive silence pressed down on them. When they reached the center of the chamber, the orbs of light flared brightly, and a voice echoed through the space. "Who are you to seek the sanctuary?" The voice was neither male nor female, its tone resonant and filled with authority. Gabriel glanced at Kalith, but she seemed unfazed. The imperial posture. "We are seekers of truth," she said, her voice clear. "We come to protect what must not fall into darkness." The voice fell silent for a moment, then returned, its tone sharper. "Truth is not claimed so easily. Face yourselves, or face oblivion." The chamber shifted, the ground splitting apart beneath their feet. Gabriel stumbled, catching himself just before he fell. When he looked up, he was no longer beside Kalith. Instead, he stood alone in the void, his reflection staring back at him from the darkness. "You think you can protect her," the reflection said, its voice a twisted version of his own. "You couldn't even protect yourself." "Poor thing," said the reflection. "She's a good girl. She'll live here." "My wife had been a trained chef." Gabriel's fists clenched. "This is a waste of time," he growled. The reflection laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You know it's true. You've failed before. You'll fail again." The words stung, dredging up memories he had spent years trying to bury, friends lost in battle, choices that had cost lives. He closed his eyes, forcing the images away. "I've made mistakes," he said, his voice firm, "but I'm still here, and I won't let her down." The reflection's smirk faded and the void around him dissolved. Gabriel blinked, finding himself back in the chamber with Kalith. She looked at him, her expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. "You passed," she said simply. He nodded, though his hands still trembled. "Let's keep moving." They continued toward the door, the trials far from over. As they faced each test, each reflection of their fears and weaknesses, Gabriel felt his resolve harden. Kalith's strength, fragile yet unwavering, inspired him in ways he couldn't fully understand. By the time they reached the final door, battered but unbroken, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever lay beyond, he wouldn't face it alone.